This weekend, the latest film in the Mad Max franchise, Furiosa, a Mad Max Saga, drops in theaters.
Oh, what a day! What a lovely day!
So let's talk about it. Hi, my name is Sean, and I love to talk about movies and TV way too much. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comment section. Let me know what's your excitement level for Furiosa, and if you've seen it, what did you think about it? As for me, I've been watching the Mad Max movies my entire life. The original trilogy used to play on TBS, TNT all the time. So they're just movies I was always watching. And then, of course, Fury Road came out 9 years ago and was so much better than any of us thought a long-delayed Mad Max movie without Mel Gibson could ever have been. Turned out to be one of the best action films of the last decade. And ever since then, George Miller has been talking about making this Furiosa film. In fact, the idea for the Furiosa film goes back like 15 years. Because Fury Road had such a long development phase, the original idea for it happened in the late 90s. He was supposed to shoot it in the early zeros with Mel Gibson, and of course it didn't come out until 2015, but he kept iterating and developing and writing the film that entire time, and because of that, he wrote Furiosa's full backstory years before they even filmed Fury Road.
In order to tell that story, in order to understand not only what each character is, each character is, and what gave rise to them, what every prop, every vehicle, every gesture, everything in the movie, we wrote the backstories for both Furiosa and for Max.
And even wrote a prequel about Mad Max and what he was doing the year before Fury Road.
Furiosa for the 18 years from when she's 10 to 28, and Max in the year before.
And the original plan was to make a Furiosa anime parallel to Fury Road. And they were in the development process. We have concept art from that happening. And eventually George Miller just went, I like that story too much, and I'm not going to be able to work enough on it while doing Fury Road. So let's kill the anime. I'm going to hold on to that. I'm going to tell that story someday. And finally, that story has been told, and it comes out this weekend. So leading up to the release of Furiosa, I did a deep dive into the Mad Max franchise. And if you love kind of the behind the scenes stuff like that story I just told about the development of Furiosa, you have to check out Blood, Sweat, and Chrome. It's a book all about the making of Fury Road. It is extremely detailed. It has a ton of information about the making of Furiosa. Also, I checked out the book Miller and Max, The Making of a Film Legend. It's not as good of a book, but it goes into the backstory and the making of the original Mad Max, Road Warrior, as well as Thunderdome, and then, of course, Fury Road as well. So between the two books, it's a great history of the Mad Max franchise. I listened to both of them on Audible. You can get a free audio book by signing up for a free trial of Audible at audibletrial.com/Sean Chandler. If you're a Mad Max fan, highly recommend doing that deep dive. But with all that said, let's get started with the good. And to cut right to the chase, this is another solid entry in the Mad Max franchise. One of the things that George Miller has done a great job of with this franchise is making each film unique and distinct. And while Furiosa is aesthetically similar to Fury Road, and we do have a number of returning characters, of course, and we go to some similar locations, we go to some of the same locations, the story itself is radically different. Fury Road is designed to be a 2-hour chase movie. Furiosa is a sprawling epic spanning over a decade's worth of time. So it's designed to kind of tell this full origin story of Furiosa while also exploring the Wasteland and helping us to learn about all the different factions, how this world works, what life is like in the Wasteland. And in doing so, this is possibly the Mad Max movie that does the most work to build out the world and help us understand what it's actually like, how these organizations relate and connect to one another. Now, if you go into it expecting like the urgent, relentless pace of Fury Road, that's not what this is. This movie pauses to explain these different factions, their rivalries, and know how each of them works and what they have to offer each other. That's what it uniquely offers, is this kind of richer experience of the world of the Wasteland. And while I did say that the movie pauses, it's also still a movie that moves at a very brisk pace, covering a lot of time, a lot of characters, a lot of different events. But also true to all of the Mad Max sequels, where essentially in them, Mad Max is kind of this wandering Ronin that joins someone else's story. That's kind of what happens here. While we are on this journey about Furiosa trying to return home and then being out for revenge, she's stepping into the world of these three different fortresses, the Citadel, Bullet Town, and Gas Town, and all of the power dynamics and struggles between all of them. She joins that adventure and kind of resolves a conflict there that leads to where things are at the beginning of Fury Road. Other thing about this movie that's a little bit different from the Mad Max sequels is that it's a much more personal story. It has the most personal stakes and emotional journey since the original Mad Max, where you have this child plucked from her home, experiencing loss of everything that she holds dear, and thus has an enemy that she wants to destroy. And all in the context of, like I said, these rivalries from between all these different factions. So you have kind of the broader scope, but at its core, there's that emotional center of Furiosa, her rage, her hate, her desires, and everything that she's working towards because of everything that she has lost. And that emotional hook combined with the sprawling nature of the story just gives you something different in this franchise. Other thing you have to talk about with this movie, of course, is the cast. The first one that comes to mind here is Chris Hemsworth as our villain in the story, Dementus. I went into the movie very nervous that he was going to be distracting, where both the first time you see the images of him, you know you're looking at Chris Hemsworth, but you also know they've put the prosthetics on him. And for the first few sequences with him in the movie, it took me a little bit to get acclimated and adjust to the fact that this is what he's doing. Once I did that, he is a lot of fun as a villain, and he's a very different villain than so many of the other villains in this franchise, where most of them are these highly revered and respected leaders of essentially these cults, and he's a very different type of leader of his band of people. They don't treat him with the same reverence and respect, and so it's just an interesting dynamic. And then the other one you have to talk about here is Furiosa. And this, you see this in the trailers that it's two actresses, but the trailers obviously focus much more heavily on Anya Taylor-Joy, the movie star that takes over as the younger Charlize Theron. She, of course, does a solid job.
I did as many of my stunts as I was allowed to do, but I also have the most incredible stunt double, Haley Wright. We shot a sequence called Stowaway to Nowhere for about 8 months, and it was 8 months of daily work.
The nature of the role, she doesn't have a lot of dialogue, so it's just having that intense stare and being able to communicate through her eyes, and she's able to do that really well, so she's convincing as this intense younger Furiosa. But there's another person that plays Furiosa for an hour of this movie, Alyla Browne, and she's also able to do a very convincing job where also doesn't have a lot of lines of dialogue. She has to communicate most of what she's doing through these kind of intense stares and the way that she just communicates through her facial emotions. She's able to do that. And the movie does a really good job even with the transition between the two of them, to where when the transition took place, the thought that I had in my mind was like, oh, I didn't realize that her eyes looked that much like Anya Taylor-Joy's. And then a couple minutes later, it was like, oh, that is Anya Taylor-Joy. And so they find a way to kind of like have the character transition into a specific look and then that kind of hides who it is. And then you come out the other side of it and you're like, oh, that's Anya Taylor-Joy. And in doing so, they're actually able to convince you of the plot point that's happening in the movie itself. And I thought that was handled really well. But a thing to keep in mind with the cast, with the characters here, Furiosa, much like Mad Max, is a very quiet character. And so the villains are actually the ones with the dialogue pushing the story forward with the exposition and everything like that. And our title character is much more just the silent person reacting to what's going on around her and then bursting into action at just the right moments. And of course, it's a Mad Max movie, so you have to talk about the action, the stunts, the car mayhem. You get plenty of that in this movie. And it has a number of sequences that are very classic Mad Max, road warrior, Fury Road, tanker driving down the road, being attacked. And you can tell that George Miller kept trying to bring in new influences. And so without wanting to say too much besides, they do for a number of aerial things where as soon as certain things started in the first of these big sequences, you heard the room go, oh, like excited as to the new dynamic being added into it. So you get that classic Mad Max chase action, but adding something just new enough, different enough to have a new element to it. And I think the movie wisely doesn't try to outdo Fury Road. It doesn't try to outdo the stunts in that movie. It just tries to deliver its own exciting action. So you get a couple of these big chases, and then a number of the chases are kind of smaller, a little bit more personal. You get kind of some carnage with like monster trucks and destroying cities and things like that to just bring something different rather than trying to outdo what the last movie perfected. So George Miller has delivered another thrilling action movie with fun, memorable characters, and this one, more so than the other films, building out the world and helping us understand this post-apocalyptic wasteland landscape. Today's video is brought to you by Factor. Summer is upon us, the sun has come out, that means it's time to have adventures outside. Fuel up for them with Factor's no prep, no mess meals. Meet your wellness goals in time for summer thanks to the menu of chef-crafted meals with options like Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, and Keto. For me, since I have a high protein diet, I go for Keto or more recently the Protein Plus. Factor's fresh, never frozen meals are dietitian approved and ready to eat in just 2 minutes, so no matter how busy you are, you always have time to enjoy nutritious, great tasting meals. With 35 different meals and more than 60 add-ons to choose from every week, you'll always have new flavors to explore. Since I like to have a lot of protein in my diet, I like to start my day with one of their protein shake add-ons. The cold brew latte is my favorite of the flavors. Head to factormeals.com/SeanChandler50 and use code SeanChandler50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month. That's code SeanChandler50 at factormeals.com/SeanChandler50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month while your subscription is active. There are a few more things to talk about with this movie, so let's move on to the mixed aspects of the film. And the big thing to talk about here is it is inevitable that people will compare this film to Fury Road. Immediately, as soon as they said they were making this movie, there were people like, well, there's no way that it'll be better than Fury Road. And I just always think that that's the wrong question to ask, in particular in a scenario like this where Fury Road is widely regarded as one of, if not the best action movie of the last decade. It's the top one. To say, well, is it better than that one? If it's not better, why even make the movie? I've always found that kind of logic bizarre, because this is like a 10 out of 10, 9 out of 10 movie. Furiosa could be an 8 out of 10 movie, which would be very good. It would be great, but it wouldn't be better than one of the best of the last decade. I think the better question is it a good movie in and of itself? And does it have something new to offer the franchise? And I would say Yes, it's a good movie, and it offers something fresh and new in the franchise. It is a very different type of movie. You can't go into this expecting another 2-hour-long chase movie. It's designed to be a much larger story. That's a good thing, but you have to go in with proper expectations. The other thing to talk about in the mixed side here are the visuals, and I'll talk more about this in the negative, but some of them are fantastic, like just classic, iconic George Miller imagery, and other ones you're like, how is this in the same movie? How is this from the same guy that did Fury Road? What's going on here? We'll talk more about that in just a second. Let's move on to the bad. As we go into these, none of these significantly hurt my experience with the film. They just were things that I noted, and they're things that might bother you more than they bothered me. I'm going to give this movie a very glowing review. First one that comes to mind, if you're someone that's bothered by kind of franchise continuity issues, in particular character ages, there's a lot of things in this movie where you'll be like, what? How does that fit together? How does this mesh together? George Miller's never seemed particularly that concerned with the Mad Max continuity, but when you do something like this where this is overtly a prequel to Fury Road, you need the connective tissue there to be strong, and it's the way that it goes down with the characters' ages and things like that. There's a little bit of like, hey, wait a minute, what's going on here? Wait, how close together are these events? What's happening here? And then, as I just mentioned, there's a number of questionable visuals here where you have shots that just clearly look like green screen, clearly look like someone on a soundstage cut into the middle of stuff shot on location. And it's both not compositive very well, but it also just stands out because there's so many shots that look so good and are on location. And this movie is a prequel to a movie from 9 years ago that every shot was convincing. Everything looked like you were in a real environment. You were actually there. And then you're watching this one and far less interesting things are happening, like people just riding a motorcycle between two cliffs. And you're like, that doesn't look right at all. So there's some bad visuals, and in the context of the franchise, it's even more noticeable. Here's one that maybe is an expectations thing, but I was kind of hoping that we would get more time at the Green Place, that we'd get more time with the Volvolini, and I wish we could have gotten just a little bit more to understand that side of things. And it would have helped the grander scope of both of these films because we would really understand what she lost. Final one on here. This is probably the most conventional of the Mad Max films. There's ways in which that's a positive, and certain things work better because of that. But when you kind of combined more conventional storytelling, conventional character arc, a little bit more green screen, a little bit more sound stages, it feels like some of the rougher edges are sanded off. We're not going as far into some of the weird. It just feels a little bit sanitized. But to be perfectly clear, these are things that I observed, they're things that I noticed. Some of you might be bothered by those a lot more than I was bothered by them. I still thoroughly enjoyed this film. Almost certainly going to be in my top 10 at the end of the year. Real quick before I give you my final thoughts, remember to join me down below in the comment section. Also come back this weekend. I'm going to be ranking all of the movies in the Mad Max franchise. And as I mentioned at the beginning, I've been doing this deep dive into the films, in which case I read 2 complete books. I've been watching a bunch of interviews with George Miller. So I'm very excited for this one. At the end of the day, George Miller continues to deliver thrilling, interesting action films in the world of Mad Max. This one has the biggest story. It has an emotional arc for our lead character. Maybe some of the visuals aren't so hot. You can't go in expecting another 2-hour chase movie like Fury Road. But if you go in with the right expectations, you're gonna get a very cool, very exciting action movie. Overall, it's an A on the entertainment scale, a 9 out of 10. And see this movie in the theater. I was able to watch it in true IMAX. It looked fantastic. It's a big action movie designed to be seen on a big screen. Highly encourage you to see it that way. Come back this weekend for my Mad Max ranking. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies and TV.